and the man who would write its course was a young songwriter named Arthur Freed.
Arthur Freed had been under contract to MGM for almost a decade as one of their principal songwriters. He had written Broadway melodies, Singin' in the Rain, Broadway Rhythm, You Are My Lucky Star, All I Do Is Dream of You.
But now it was only 1937, and while Louis B. Mayer had great confidence in the talent of his young songwriter, he knew Arthur Freed couldn't make Oz alone. Filling the power vacuum that had existed at MGM since the death of Wonderkin production chief Irving Thalberg, Mayer brought in Mervyn LeRoy to head up production.
Mervyn LeRoy had been really mostly a director, but he couldn't turn down this chance to have, a key production position at the Tiffany studio that was MGM in the 30s. So he came over in early 38, and it turned out that he had always had a dream of doing an Oz movie.
I always wanted to make The Wizard of Oz since I was a kid. I always loved the Oz books. In fact, I have the original Oz books that I had when I was 8 or 9 years old. The Wizard of Oz is a very simple story. The whole story of The Wizard of Oz is There's No Place Like Home.
Like two trains arriving at the same station from different directions, Freed and LeRoy found themselves sharing a dream, making a film version of The Wizard of Oz that was worthy of the book. Having already been immersed in the project for months, Freed excitedly showed LeRoy his cast lists, his memos, and most importantly, his song ideas.
Arthur Freed and Roger Edens, who was one of his top musical talents on staff, actually wrote an outline of what the songs should be in The Wizard of Oz. And they did this before they had hired a songwriting team. And the astonishing thing is when you look at the songs that they came up with, the titles are different, but the story points where they put them in are almost entirely out of that list.
But before there could be a movie, there had to be a script. And like every other aspect of the creation of Oz, the process was arduous.
The Oz scripts went through 14 or 15 different writers or consultants or advisors from early 1938 to October 38 when principal photography began. There was a lot of plot manipulation that had nothing to do with the Baum story. But it was Noel Langley who came in and did a workable early script. Florence Ryerson and Edgar Allan Wolfe came in and were instrumental in getting the script back to Baum.
If Oz's screenplay was the foundation, it was the music that would bring the story to life.
There's something about songwriting, and it's terribly mysterious. Two people get together and have an idea. Now, it has to be wedded perfectly.
The lyrics are the wings to the music, and the music are the wings to the lyrics. Without it, they're clay-footed and they lie on the ground.
With the cast in place, producer Mervyn LeRoy told his boss there was only one man who could direct The Wizard of Oz, Mervyn LeRoy. But Louis B. Mayer felt the film was just too large for one man to both produce and direct.
So Leroy was out. They knew they needed someone with some rapport with kids, so they initially thought of Norman Turog, who had a huge record of dealing with kids' subjects, but because of that, he was taken off to do The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
There was so much hue and cry about the budget escalating all the time from New York that Richard Thorpe got assigned to The Wizard of Oz because he was known as a churn it out, chug it along, move it through kind of director.
The Wizard of Oz finally had its director. On October 13, 1938, after a year of preparation, Mervyn LeRoy and Arthur Freed stood side by side on the set as cameras finally rolled in the land of Oz. And then it all went wrong.
Thorpe started to shoot.
He shot The Cornfield, Dorothy Meets Scarecrow. He shot in The Witch's Castle.
And the rushes came in, and Leroy saw that it just wasn't working in any way.
Mervyn LeRoy hated the manic quality of those scenes, felt that Thorpe didn't have the touch for Oz, didn't understand the fantasy of Oz. When Buddy Ebsen as the Tin Man got sick from the aluminum poisoning, the picture had to shut down, and at that point, LeRoy fired Thorpe.
The Wizard of Oz had once again reached a crossroads. With the budget ballooning, MGM's parent company, Lowe's, tried to pull the plug. But Mervyn LeRoy was not going to allow his dream project to go up in smoke. To pull his film out of the fire, LeRoy turned to an MGM stalwart, director George Cukor.
He was known as a man of taste, a man of imagination. He had done some great classics like Little Women and David Copperfield. He was never really, I think, picked as the guy who would actually see the movie through. Everyone knew he was attached to Gone with the Wind, which was finally revving up next door at Selznick International. But when he came on, he did some very important things. He was part of the process to get the Scarecrow to where the Scarecrow looks today. And more essentially, he changed Dorothy's look. Dorothy had a blonde wig, a more glamorous kind of ingenue appearance, and it wasn't working. And in fact, people who saw the early rushes said that Garland, partly responding to that look, was giving a very artificial performance.
Cukor said to Judy Garland, "Judy, just be yourself." Now, it's a fabulous piece of advice, and one that shows up in the movie, because we can see she brings to bear all of the unfinished qualities of her personality. And while it's hard to say exactly how that comes into the movie, as Judy Garland is the centerpiece of Oz, I connect that back to George Cukor.
But Cukor's tenure as Oz director proved even shorter than Richard Thorpe's had been.
Cukor said, look, I've done this much, but I've got to get over to Selznick because we're going to start shooting Gone with the Wind in a month.
Once again, the Wizard of Oz was adrift without a captain. In desperation, Mervyn LeRoy turned to the one man he believed could right the ship, Victor Fleming.
Of all the directors on the MGM lot, Fleming could take a troubled production and fix it. Arthur Freed said, just from talking to Fleming at the commissary, just from having coffee with him, he knew he had a personality that would click with this material. And LeRoy had started as an actor and had acted in one of Fleming's silent films. So the two of them knew that this was a director of great reach, of great command, and that he was the perfect guy to guide their ship.
Victor Fleming knew that no department would be more important to Oz than costumes. Happily, Adrian had already designed a score of films for Fleming. The two men trusted each other completely.
Adrian, in my estimation, is the greatest costume designer that was ever produced in Hollywood.
He was a costume designer who was known for doing contemporary fashion. He got to develop all the little Munchkinland diverse costumes, carrying off far beyond what Denslow had illustrated in the book.
They were made out of felt, which is a sort of odd thing for costumes to be made out of. It's uncompromising, it doesn't drape, it's thick. So what it does is it allows for every detail to stand out in its own, every flower, every button, every flounce. It's almost like icing a cake, so that each little bit has its own sense of importance.
I was one of the sleepyheads. We had like little eggshells up on top of a house, and we had a pink nightgown and a hat on it looked like a shower cup.
Hooray! We're off to see a wizard!
After suffering through hours in the makeup chair, each of the veteran performers surrounding young Judy Garland was determined to maximize his moment in the limelight. Savvy director Victor Fleming, however, was more than a match for these three vaudevillians.
Whenever we do that little dance up the yellow brick road,
yeah, I remember that.
I was supposed to be with them.
Yeah.
You know.
They'd crowd you out.
They'd shut me out. They'd close in the three of them, and I would be in back of them dancing. I wasn't good enough, you know, to say, wait a minute. And so the director, Victor Fleming, was darling man. He was always up on a boom. Would say, hold it! You three dirty hands! Let that little girl in there.
Once, when Garland was unable to contain her laughter during a take, director Victor Fleming made a difficult choice, as his frequent collaborator, screenwriter John Lee Mahan, remembered.
So Vic took her behind the set, behind one of the cheeses, telling this is serious, and he slapped her face hard. And he slapped her face hard, and he said, go in there and work. And they did one take of the scene. He says, cut, marvelous. He turned to me, he said, he's a big, tough-looking guy with a broken nose. He said, I wish you'd hit me in the nose and break it again. I said, why? He said, what I did to her then.
With Victor Fleming at the helm, Oz now began to come to life in living color. In fact, Oz's color was so alive, it presented cinematographer Harold Rossin with challenges few filmmakers had ever faced.
Wizard of Oz was only the 7th or 8th full-length film to be done in 3-strip Technicolor.
Hal Rossin, the cinematographer of Wizard of Oz, certainly one of the giants of that era. He was involved in Gone with the Wind, he shot Singing in the Rain. You know, thankfully he got the job because Wizard of Oz, for years and years, was the standard bearer of how well those effects could be achieved.
But giving the audience eye-popping color wasn't enough for Victor Fleming and Hal Rawson. In their numerous collaborations together, the two had developed a fluid style that involved moving the camera. They were not about to allow the 400-pound Technicolor camera to cramp their style.
The cameras were very large, so moving the camera was really a challenge. And I think when you see the movement in The Wizard of Oz and then sort of realize what they had to deal with, it's even more remarkable.
Rawson should get a lot of the credit for the fluidity of Oz and what he was able to do that was innovative with a 3-strip Technicolor camera, which was a monster.
Basically, the way the Technicolor works is it's really 3 cameras in one. It's actually 3 black and white pieces of film being photographed through red, green, and blue filters. You're recording red information, green, and blue information that is in that scene, and then you can recompile that on the optical printer to create color. But of course, technically, it had to be very precise. One of the key moments in The Wizard of Oz is the transition from the black and white, or what was supposed to be the real world, into the fantasy world of Munchkinland and Oz. It's all done in camera at the same time through sleight of hand. The way it's done is a double for Dorothy walks in and opens the door. Even though it's photographed in color, the set has been painted in black and white colors, and her dress is a copy, but it's a black and white copy. So she walks in quickly, opens the door, and she leaves frame just for a second. She hands Toto to Judy Garland, and then Judy Garland walks into the scene with her color dress into the Technicolor world of Munchkinland. What a great little idea that tells the story.
If you imagine people in 1939, before the Great Depression has ended, walking into this movie, bringing to a certain extent the grayness of their own lives into what is obviously the grayness of Dorothy's life in Kansas, to be smacked in the face with this rich, saturated Technicolor, to be blindsided by it, is in a way to be themselves lifted out of their own kind of depression and transported into Oz.
Principal photography on The Wizard of Oz wrapped on March 16, 1939. Despite the film's troubled birth, those who made it would treasure the experience for a lifetime.
I've made a lot of pictures, and I have never made a picture that had the feeling that you did working on The Wizard of Oz, because you didn't go to the set of The Wizard of Oz. You went to the land of Oz every day, and it was a wonderful feeling.
With the film in the can, MGM's post-production team began turning raw material into Hollywood magic. Like every other aspect of The Wizard of Oz, the film's special effects were state-of-the-art.
MGM had the best of the best, whether it was in front of the camera or behind the camera, and the perfect example of that is A. Arnold Buddy Gillespie, who was in charge of special effects. He and his staff had to figure out how to make a tornado when there was no film footage of a tornado.
He came across the idea of creating this funnel cloud by noticing that a windsock blowing in the wind had a certain quality that looked like a funnel cloud.
And finally they came up with that concept of a 30-foot-long muslin stocking wound around chicken wire from the top of the set to below the set.
But just to point at things and say, well, there's the tornado, there's the storm, is not as effective as having your characters in the scene actually a part of the illusion. So the way they did this at MGM was through a process called rear projection. So Dorothy would be photographed in front of a rear projection screen with a minimal set on a platform, in this case, the gate to her farm, and behind her would be the projection of the miniature of the tornado. The camera would be photographing Dorothy on a partial set with a rear projection screen of the tornado, and then in the background, the rear projector, which was a device that was used to project the image on the screen, would be part of the process of creating that illusion. This device would have had the brightest light source known to man, because you want to make that image as big as you can behind Dorothy. And it needs to be bright in order to be exposed properly with the live-action foreground.
Though Oz's tornado is the film's most iconic special effect, it is by no means the only one. The film's state-of-the-art matte paintings were overseen by a mysterious figure known as Warren Newcomb.
Warren Newcomb's matte painting department lived inside a fairly nondescript building on the MGM backlot. It's really quite surprising how big his department was.
He had about 30 guys working for him. Cameramen, art department people who could do sketches, and then matte painters. The way that Warren Newcomb did matte paintings would be the Technicolor camera would be set up on the set with what's called a matte box. The matte artist would choose what part of the scene they would want to photograph on film, and then what part would be reserved for a matte painting. They would then complete the effect by exposing the painting into the live action, creating the final image that's in the film.
With the special effects in place and the film nearing completion, the studio arranged for a series of test screenings. The initial cut ran 2 hours.
They knew they had to cut the running time down because 2 hours was just too long. Now, one of the easiest ways to do that is to take out a whole number and you gain 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They took out Ray Bolger's If I Only Had a Brain Dance, cut it down to just the song. They cut out the jitterbug.
Is that hiding in the treetop? Is that rascal the jitterbug?
They cut out the triumphal return to the Emerald City, which was this $100,000 film montage of Judy and company bringing the broomstick of the Wicked Witch back.
And there was another scene the studio executives felt should go.
There was this 3-minute ballad within the first 10 minutes of the film. And there was this grumbling, oh, it slows down the picture. You know, why does Judy Garland have to sing in a barnyard of all places?
The studio thought it dragged on too long. Get them into Oz already.
The songwriters, Arlen and Harburg, of course, were crushed. But I think more than crushed, they were angry.
If there is a pivotal moment on the road to Oz, it is this one. What would the Wizard of Oz be without Over the Rainbow? The man who came to the rescue was Arthur Freed.
Freed, who was trained in music, knew what we all know now, and that is this is an essential piece of music, an immortal piece of music, and fought to keep it in the picture.
The song would also become Judy Garland's anthem. She would sing it all her life.
If happy little bluebirds fly over the rainbow, why then, oh why can't I?
After a year and a half and the expenditure of more than $2 million, the filmmakers had brought The Wizard of Oz to life. With the film complete, MGM's formidable marketing machine turned into action.
When they finally got it ready for summer of '39, the idea was, let's make it an event. They did 500 Technicolor film prints and saturation booking all over the country simultaneously. Life magazine had features, Judy was on movie magazine covers, and to really launch it big, MGM sent Judy and Mickey Rooney, Mickey then the #1 male box office star, to New York to promote Wizard of Oz. Roger Edens, Metro's ace music man, put together a 30-minute live act for Judy and Mickey. Georgie Stoll conducted a 20-piece orchestra on stage at the Capitol. So in effect, for the first 2 weeks of the Wizard of Oz booking in New York, for your 15 cents, you went in and got selected short subjects, cartoons, previews of coming attractions, The Wizard of Oz for the first time. Then the curtain went down, and when it came up again, there was a 20-piece orchestra on stage, and Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney came out live and did a half-hour act. And the kids did that 5 shows a day, except on weekends when they did 7 shows a day.
And despite everything, The Wizard of Oz lost money in its initial release. Though the film's box office receipts could have been better, the critical reaction left nothing to be desired.
The legend has come down that this film was not well reviewed at the time, but that's not true. It was actually extremely well reviewed.
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
As 1939 drew to a close, it seemed The Wizard of Oz would be just another movie, destined to be forgotten like so many others. It would take 2 decades and the invention of a new medium called television to give the film its immortality. Starting in 1956 and becoming an annual event in 1959, Oz broadcast became a holiday tradition around the country.
The Wizard of Oz is one of a number of movies that was successful in its time, but really became iconic because of the repeated showings on television.
I'm of the generation, I think the classic, growing up with The Wizard of Oz once a year on TV.
What people have to remember is that this is before the existence of home video, before the 200-channel universe, before there was such a thing as pay cable.
I think that's hard for kids nowadays to really fathom because you had to wait. You couldn't go back, you couldn't pause it. So you waited all year for this one event. And of course, the entire family watched it. There was nothing like it.
When a big network like CBS made a big deal out of showing The Wizard of Oz one night a year, it was an event like the Super Bowl.
The Wizard of Oz was the first movie that I ever saw on color television. I guess I must have been 6 or 7 years old. And the movie started, and I thought, well, what's the deal? Because it looks the same as anything else. And of course, she walked out into Munchkinland, and it was color. That became an indelible memory for me.
I don't think it's possible to calculate how many people were introduced to the movie that way at that time. Probably more people saw that in one night on that telecast every year than had seen it in sum total in all the theatrical showings before it. That's the power of television.
There's no place like home.
Among filmmakers, everybody always says, you know, no matter what, every movie comes back to The Wizard of Oz because it's about self-discovery and about a journey that takes you to a new place and that ultimately you're heading back to yourself and home. Every great movie has that in its DNA. It's a perfect story.
I could while away the hours, conferring with the flowers, consulting with the rain. And my head I'd be scratching while my thoughts were busy hatching if I only had a brain.